The government still feels that a special task force is required to deal with those assignments needing mutant expertise. The name of the new task force, a task force endorsed by the president, is X-Factor. Today on the Comic Book Report, X-Factor by Peter David Omnibus, Volume 1. Stick around and check it out. Greetings all, my name is Dominic and you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we're throwing it all the way back to the early 90s for the beginning of Peter David's X-Factor run. And if you'd like your own copy, I encourage you to check out our channel sponsor, organicpricebooks.com. Use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order today. Using my affiliate link or codes does give me a small commission, but it's a great way to support the channel. Thank you for considering. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's review. But first, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Peter David, along with Fabian Nicieza and Scott Lobdell. The issues were primarily illustrated by Kirk Harvinen, Larry Stroman, Dale Keown, Joe Quesada, and others. The issues in this volume were first published by Marvel Comics beginning in 1990. David's proper run on this book began in the fall of 1991. The volume itself collects X-Factor issue 55, as well as issues 70 through 92, X-Factor Annual issues 7 and 8, Incredible Hulk issue 390 through 392, and material from X-Factor Annual issue 5 and 6, and New Mutants Annual issue 6. And finally, this oversized hardcover comes in at 848 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a brief spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that X-Factor Omnibus from Peter David. And while I really love the cover I chose, I will point out that this is the direct market cover for this omnibus. I'll go ahead and throw up a picture of the standard edition cover as well for you to compare. Okay, and here's a look at the spine. So this is one of those white-spined Marvel omnibuses. I happen to really like the look of this omnibus spine. I know some people just prefer the black, so I did want to give a look at what this looks like. I've also been told that the Volume 2 X-Factor omnibus from Peter David also has a different stylized font for the X-Factor logo, so that's something else to be aware of as well for the collectors out there. And that back cover for the dust jacket, just stunning. Love the kind of action artwork. And now that we've done that quick look, let's go ahead and remove the dust jacket. I'll give you a quick look at what this whole dust jacket actually looks like, the inside flaps, all of that. You can see what it looks like when it's all opened up. And then I'll go ahead and show you the under the dust jacket artwork we have for this omnibus. I'm excited to say the under the dust jacket artwork is a wraparound cover, and I love seeing it. They did a spectacular job on this omnibus. And let's go ahead and take a look at that under the dust jacket artwork. I'll show you all the different sides of it, and then I'll go ahead and do a spread view so you can get a scope and grasp for what I'm talking about here. I love this. I think that when I think 90s comics, I think full-on action, and this series is no exception. And now that I've shown off the back, I'll go ahead and spread so you can see this full wraparound under the dust jacket artwork we have. Just chef's kiss, mwah, amazing. I really love the cover design and the art on this omnibus. So happy I got the direct market cover, couldn't be more pleased. And now I want to give you a quick look at the binding for this omnibus. It is a nice sewn binding with a little bit of an eye. I had no problems with this binding. I think that there was little gutter loss, but overall really pleased. These omnibus spines I've been pretty happy with lately, and this is no exception. And now that we've addressed some of the book mechanics and the format and edition, let's go ahead and dive into the book proper. And I'm happy to say I thoroughly enjoyed this read. I will give just a brief context to my history with this book and this title. I was vaguely aware of the X Factor book. I have some crossover issues with different X Omnis I have in my collection, but I'd never done really any kind of proper read through any of the X Factor runs. I knew of Peter David. I've read some of the stuff he's done and really enjoyed it, but I'm still new to the Peter David of it all. I had heard about this series and I was kind of on the fence, but I got a killer deal on a sale, and I can just say I am so happy that I gave it a chance. This has fast become one of my favorite X-Team runs. I think Peter David's blend of character-driven narrative, adventure, action, and just kind of hijinks, humor, mischief just all blends together into something really special with this book. An added interest I had picking up this title was I was aware that Peter David continued on his X Factor run in the 2000s era, right around House of M time period, and I understood that that series was also quite good. I have heard that this era and that 2000s era can really stand alone and be read more or less independently, but there is a Volume 2 X Factor Omnibus from Peter David that's already been released, and a Volume 3 that's solicited to come out later this year at the time of the recording. And because of that series' premise and its relationship to House of M, I knew that I'd want to check out some of that run as well, so I decided to go all the way back to the beginning of Peter David's run on X Factor, all the way back to the 90s. And again, this was so fun. I'm leaving this book absolutely charmed, and I cannot wait to discuss it more with all of you. This book picks up at the end of the misadventures that happened on Muir Island. I felt like you didn't need to read anything leading into this book. This is a great entry-level book at the start of Peter David's run, but it does give you this sort of epilogue transition issue that bridges the gap into this new team of X Factor. Now, X Factor in this run, for all intents and purposes, is a government-sanctioned, endorsed, regulated X team. And this particular lineup is helmed and led by Havok, Cyclops' brother, and includes people like Polaris, Madrox, the Multiple Man, Rain, Guido or Strong Guy, and of course Quicksilver, who comes in and out. They're also sort of managed by their sort of handler, government liaison, Val Cooper, and that kind of rounds out this X Factor crew. One of my favorite facets about this primary cast is that they are a lot of secondary or tertiary level X-Men characters. There are a couple, of course, fan favorite mutants in this lineup, but there's a few that I frankly had never even heard of before picking up this run. Guido or Strong Guy I'd never even seen before, but he fast became one of my favorite facets of this book, and easily one of my favorite mutant characters. This is also a very eclectic team that have a lot of different kind of conflicting ideologies, personality profiles, character flaws, what have you. No one is overly thrilled to be regulated by the government, and they're constantly put in the middle of mutant affairs or issues that they maybe don't even agree with sort of the letter of the law kind of vision of what their government is sort of planning with things, but they're still kind of sent in to regulate and do the best they can. And I think that kind of conflict, just in the very base, inherent core of this team, adds to a lot of the dysfunctional fun we have throughout many of the issues showcased in this omnibus. I also really liked a team that was completely led by Havok. I think that putting him at the forefront just made a lot of sense, and he added a lot of stability to the team, and I really appreciated that. I think Quicksilver's sort of on-again, off-again sort of dance with this team was also kind of fun. He adds a sense of defiance and a really good-hearted dude overall, but we get him kind of, bristling with just about everyone on the main team. I did enjoy that. I think the exploration of Rain Sinclair's character was also really fascinating. Having read all of her origins and the issues of New Mutants and things like that, to see this era for this character was definitely interesting. I think that they kind of develop and tease out a lot of what happened to her, especially in Genosha, right before this arc picks up, and they pay it off toward the latter half of this omnibus, but really fascinating stuff, really a pivot in this character's history, and I thought that was quite interesting. Also, the history between Polaris and Havok is explored here and there. I liked that a lot too. I liked the flirtation and some of the on-again, off-again nature of that. I think that Madrox, the Multiple Man, and Strong Guy, Guido, are really the comedic relief to this book, but they also have some of the most poignant dramatic moments and performances in this whole omnibus. I know the first couple issues actually deal with the death of one of Multiple Man's multiples, and that has a lot of heavy-handed character bits to it that I just think right from the get really locked me in on this character and this cast of characters overall. I think Guido Strong Guy is really an interesting character as well. His whole gimmick was basically his powers have to do with sort of energy absorption, but he has to expel it. He can kind of take in kinetic energy, get stronger, but he has to vent it or release it. Otherwise, bad things happen. He first found out about his mutation when he got hit, I think, by a school bus, and he got this bloated upper body, just crazy strength, and he didn't know what was happening or that he had to vent his powers, so this effect became permanent. However, his just overinflated form leaves him in constant pain. So the idea is that he's the comedic relief, but ultimately he's really using humor to offset the constant agony he is in with this body of his. Really tragic backstory. I know when they revealed that maybe midway through this omnibus, I was really rattled, and it made Guido just one of my absolute favorite characters of all time. One thing that maybe wasn't my favorite character move in this omnibus is Val Cooper, the kind of handler and government go-between for this team. I think in the beginning, I really liked her character. She was a little bit standoffish, but her heart seemed to be in the right place. But as you go throughout the collection, you're kind of left wondering, is she being brainwashed? Is she being controlled? Or is she just going a little bit mad? And like her character is just sort of underutilized in the back half of this collection, at least in my opinion. I think that's such a fascinating character and role within a mutant book, and I think that it could have been used even better. But I think that was just maybe a so-so kind of performance. But beyond that, I really loved all the cast of characters here, and I think that we were treated to some wonderful moments. Like I said earlier, one of my favorite features about Peter David's run here is the humor. We have constant jokes between Strong Guy and the Multiple Man, and I was just left laughing out loud a couple points reading this book. I think the interplay between all the characters. I also like Quicksilver's dry wit and his biting kind of commentary, criticisms, and humor. Really just was a fun read. There's also a couple like in-jokes that are like really comical. Like there's this one, I guess, supervillain who wants to take down these mutants, and every so often you get a couple panels of his exploits as he tries to empower himself or build machines to take down the X-Men or, X-Factor. And these kind of hijinks and these little in-jokes or visual art gags throughout this book, I really just see a lot of winking kind of humor here, and I really love that. I think that it added a sense of levity in a book that would have otherwise been just another book on the shelf. I think another one that really punches this book up, another feature of it, I should say, is, again, the character drama. This is first and foremost a character-driven narrative. I feel after reading this, even with the mutants or the characters I knew almost nothing about, I now feel, if not an expert, I feel so much more well-versed with these characters, their psyches, their backstories, their motivations, and I think that everything just gels, and I'm really impressed by that. Another feature about this run, it is an early 90s comic book, so there is a ton of action. There is frenetic movement and violence and big guns and commandos and just tons and tons of action sequences. But I think what I love is not only how well these action scenes are depicted by the incredible artists lined up on this book, but also that the action is never really the primary feature of this book. I think that it could have been a full-on action adventure comic, and that could have been all it was, but the fact that the action serves the story, the action serves the characters, and not the other way around, I really feel like that empowered this book and made it something more than just a 90s action book. And I think even looking at this cover, you could get the wrong idea about what this series really is. It is first and foremost character-driven and just excellent. As far as the plot lines go throughout this book, however, I will say overall I was really impressed. There were a lot of just mutant assignment mission sort of hijinks throughout. But some of my notable favorites, I did like the first few issues that dealt with the death or murder of one of Multiple Man's multiples. Like I said, very character driven, and right away was intriguing, interesting, and got me just glued in on this team and those characters. Some of my favorite as well, there's this one issue that is, I'm sure, pretty well known for this run, but it's sort of each of the X Factor members being interviewed and kind of doing a therapy session with a psychiatrist, and they kind of get into their backstories, some of their intimate, psychological, or personal battles or things they're working through or trying to overcome, some of their flaws or drama. But this issue was just done to pitch perfect perfection. I loved getting that inside look into all those characters. Like I said, I think it's one of the things that makes this so character driven. Like, who does an action 90s comic that is just a complete therapy session issue? And yet it was one of my favorites from the entire run. There are a good handful of issues that have to do with the expatriates, these kind of refugees or runaway sort of mutants, mutates that are kind of fleeing from Genosha. These issues are really interesting. They tie into some overall X narratives that are going on around this time. I thought the issues and kind of the political intrigue between mutant-human relations and stuff was definitely interesting. We also have a few issues with the villain Cyber that I thought was fascinating. We get some stuff with Strife. Actually, that leads me into one of the other plot points that I want to bring up with this omnibus in general. We have a lot of sort of crossovers that X Factor is a part of, things like Executioner's Song or Fatal Attractions, and just some of these bigger X book events. One of the things I maybe disliked about this collection a little bit was that we don't get all of the tie-ins for these crossovers. I really love collections, especially omnibus editions, where you get all of the tie-ins so you have the full event to read. And this collection does not do that. We only have the X Factor contributions, and I think that the collection is maybe a little bit poorer because of that, because you have a couple stories that just feel very incomplete, or you're not really sure how you feel about them because you want to read more of the story. We also have some where, like, let's say X Factor had 2 issues in this whole event. You'll have just those 2 issues, but they might be issue like 2 and 6 of a 12-issue event or something like that. So it could be a little bit disjointed as far as the reading experience where those event book tie-ins go. However, the saving grace for this collection, and something I really liked about this omnibus that you don't always see, is that when these event books kind of came in, over the top of the cover of the previous issue or the issue that deals with these tie-ins, it does like a paragraph blurb of what happened since or what happened in the interstitial issues, so that even though you don't get to read those issues in this collection per se, you get kind of a plot synopsis of what happened so you can track the storytelling. So again, while I would always prefer to have the full event in these collections, this is probably as close as I can get without the issues that are not X Factor to still enjoying the storyline. I don't feel totally left out because these paragraph blurbs really kind of fill in the gaps for the storytelling. So I did like that, but I will just note there were a couple of events like this that you could feel a little bit disjointed if, like me, you haven't read these full events in the past. But the blurbs sure do help, and thank you, Marvel, for adding those. We also have a crossover with the Incredible Hulk, and it does include the Incredible Hulk issues. That was a really fun crossover event. A lot of really great scenes with Havok and the Hulk. I also love, because Peter David had a classic run on that Hulk run, it was fun to see that included in this X Factor Peter David Omnibus. Just kind of a little bit of a tiptoe on the greener side of the fence, so to speak. But overall, like I said, just really a great collection. There's also a couple annuals in here. I really liked always reading the annuals. Those kind of felt a little bit set apart, but they were a ton of fun, each one of them. And the last few issues of this omnibus are portions of kind of an older X Factor issue, I think it was 55, as well as material from some of these other annuals that Peter David did for X Factor and for New Mutants. What's interesting is that these are placed out of chronological order. We start with his proper X Factor run, and then these ones at the end started coming out in around 1990, and these are materials he kind of had that's tied to this X Factor run, but that were done before his run proper began. So we have one annual that has to do primarily with Beast, which is a ton of fun, and then the 2 or 3 materials from these annuals for X Factor and New Mutants all kind of have this theme of sort of eulogy, cemetery, kind of remembering someone from the past. And they were all done just exceedingly well, in my opinion. The first one is Jean Grey, kind of remembering like her past and trying to figure out who she was, who she is now, her relationship to the Phoenix. She has this whole conversation with this complex Holocaust survivor about who they really are when you feel like you have all of these different eras to your life. Almost how do you reconcile what your identity is? Really fun little bit from that annual. After that, we have one that focuses on Doug Ramsey, who was a dearly departed New Mutant character. We have his ghost sort of hovering in the cemetery, and we have just this really interesting reflection between him and Rain. Really fun little short story as well. And then they have a story that focuses on Mystique and her dearly departed Destiny. This whole one has to do with Destiny's precognition and always trying to get Mystique to move on with her life and laugh. And it seems kind of serious at first, but the end of it is just one of the most laugh out loud, uproariously funny portions of this entire collection that I'll try to save for you to read for yourselves. But overall, this was a really great collection. The plot lines, like I said, there's some I didn't even mention in this video. There are so many. But each one of them just about was a ton of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience, and I'm really curious to compare this 90s run with his early mid-2000s stuff. Frankly, this was a bit off the beaten path for me. I've been reading a lot more of the mainstream X-Men titles, but as I'm kind of getting into the deeper weeds of these other X books, I've been pleasantly surprised overall by what I've found, and this X-Factor run by Peter David is definitely amongst my favorites now. Again, something to do with the intense character-driven narrative coupled with that humor and just beautiful artwork throughout. It really puts it up there for me as one of my premier 90s comic book series of all time that I've read so far. I am very curious what the general consensus on this run is. I would love to know what you think of it if you've read it down in the comments below. I think one of the reasons I wanted to do a review of this book is I don't want it to get passed by. I think lately I've seen so much press, so much buzz, so many reviews for the subsequent X-Factor Peter David Omnibus Volume 2 collection that again is around the House of M era, X-Factor Investigations era, but I don't want this one to get slept on. I think that this one is maybe not talked about as much, especially recently, but having just read it for myself, I think that there's a lot of modern audiences out there who would have a ton of fun with this book as I have. So I definitely want to encourage you, if this book sounds fun to you, there's so much more than I've even described here in this book, and I had a ton of fun with this collection. I've still seen it at the time of this recording on pretty good sales or deals online. Try to snag it before it goes out of print. I know it's been in print for a while, so hopefully some of you interested will still be able to pick up your copy. But yeah, had such fun reading this myself. Toward the back of the book, we have a nice handful of extras, including an afterword, a lot of character sketches and artwork at different phases of development. We have some cover art, we have some promotional art, we have some interesting pinups, some trading cards, so many extras at the back of this book. I think if you're a fan of 90s art, there is a ton to love with the extras here, and I was really encouraged to see just how generous they were with some of these extras. Always fun to see, included with omnibus editions, and this one is no different. I mean, just look at this. There's just page upon page of all this extra bonus artwork in particular. Really great to see it. Really love this collection. The art was so strong throughout. A very fun 90s X book, one of my favorites. And now as I reach the back of this collection, I think all that's left to do today is to give this book a grade. While this omnibus collection might not have some of your classic or quintessential X-Men moments, this book does have so many character-driven narratives that are memorable, interesting, surprising, and altogether humorous. The art is strong throughout, and Peter David really got me to care about mutant characters I had hardly ever heard of. For these reasons and so many more, the Comic Book Report is happy to give X-Factor by Peter David Omnibus Volume 1 a B+. This is definitely within the realm of must-read recommendations for any X-Men fan out there, especially if you're looking for something outside of the traditional X-Men team lineups. This is such an amazing book. It's well-paced with a ton of fun adventures, and it left me eager for the subsequent omnibuses. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Don't forget to leave your like and consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, have a good one.